All right, we'll go on and get started, y'all. This is Dr. Carson. He received a Doctor of Osteopathy degree from Edward via College of Osteopathic Medicine in Blacksburg, Virginia. He completed his internship in family medicine residency at Southern Illinois University in Springfield. Dr. Carson then went on to complete a fellowship in sports medicine at Baton Rouge General Hospital. He currently works as a team physician for LSU and Southern University Athletics. So y'all welcome Dr. Carson.
All right. How's it? Huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you know, the actual, it's in Carbondale, actually, and the residency is in Illinois. In Springfield. So, all right. So they asked me to give this talk, injuries to the weekend warrior. So I said, I was reluctant, but they kind of pretty much said, you're going to do it. So we're going to keep it really informal. So if you have any questions, feel free to just stop me. I know it's supposed to be a question and answer segment at the end, but I keep things informal. So you know, some of these, you know, you look at the injuries to the weekend warrior, these, you know, Saturdays, I don't know who got a bike ride in this morning, but, you know, does this look like anybody? You know, and then you're out here playing basketball. It just looks like one of you guys, actually. Is that you in this picture? Yeah. But then you end up like this on Monday, you know? You're all hurting, you know? So what is the weekend warrior? So it's basically individuals who engage in demanding recreational sporting events on the weekends despite minimal physical activity throughout the week. So we'll talk about that. So I just put a slide in there, so just some common sports injuries that we get. So this talk is pretty much very basic, but like I said, if you have any questions, definitely let me know. So one of the most common injuries you get that we see for people are things like an ankle sprain. So, you know, what is ankle sprain? So it's a tear of the ligament supporting the ankle. And you have different degrees. We don't necessarily have to get into all of different degrees, but you can get basically mild, medium, and severe ankle sprain. And mostly it happens from, you know, when you're playing or whatever you're doing, you roll your foot inward, all right? And that's what kind of causes the tear of the ligaments. So pain and swelling is mostly common. It's a very common injury.
What is a high ankle sprain?
So a high ankle sprain. So you have your ligaments that's in your ankle that connects the ankle to the tibia bone, but then the high ankle sprains are basically the syndesmosis ligaments that are connected, basically your tibia and your fibia, a little higher than your talus bone. And that's when that sprain is a little bit harder to heal, and that's why most people, when they get it, it's kind of so it's not. I think ankle sprain, the high ankle sprain is a kind of a little bit of a misnomer, but that's what that is, and that's what causes that ankle sprain. Yeah, it's just a hard area to heal because of, I guess, blood flow and things like that. So, but just like anything, as you've been told for years and years, when you get some kind of injury, especially like an ankle sprain, rest, ice, compress, and elevate. Most people get it, they put an ice pack on for a little while, and then they just say, it didn't work. You need to put it, you know, especially when it initially happens, 15 to 20 minutes, several times a day, I would say like every 3 hours or so, especially when it first occurs, because what you want to do is keep that swelling down as much as possible. You want to kind of keep it tight. So most people, especially when you sprain your ankle playing, say, sports or basketball or something like that, the best thing to probably do is to go ahead and tighten that shoe up. Don't take it off. You know, you want to keep it compressed. You want to keep the area elevated. Another slide I put in and took out. So when do you see a physician for ankle sprain? Most people, I'm sure, have sprained their ankles at some point in their time. You sprain your ankle and you get to the point where you can't take a step, say an hour or two after it occurs. You can't put any kind of weight on it at all. It's a lot, it just feels different. It doesn't feel like a regular ankle sprain. Most people with sprained their ankle, you can at least kind of limp on it a little bit, but you can put a little weight on it, although it bothers you. If it gets to the point where you can't even put any weight on it for a significant period of time, then that's the time to kind of get in to be seen. For the most part, it's not necessarily like an emergency, but if you see a bone come through your skin, then that's an emergency. Just want to put that one out there. So that's a no-brainer. Come in, go straight to the ER. But for the most part, a lot of these things can be handled in-house. NSAIDs are also your key as well, so it's doing all of this stuff: rest, ice, compression, elevate, anti-inflammatories such as Aleve, ibuprofen. They work well. So when you get an ankle sprain, the best thing to do is to keep it in motion, all right? Don't just keep it stiff. So while you're rest icing and elevating, you can move it around. You want to do as much motion as you can. You want to try to push off on it as much as you can. That helps reduce swelling and keeps your, kind of helps basically do like a little simple rehab of your ankle earlier. The earlier the better, if you can tolerate it. If it's to the point where the pain is too much, listen to your body. Of course, if it's too painful, don't just say, Dr. Carson told me to push through it. Like, no, don't do that. All right.
We do this right away. I mean, keep doing it from the day of the sprain on.
If best you can. Best you can is best. It's best because it can help push that fluid, blood flow, and push that fluid back up, extra fluid out of your ankle. But again, if it's too swollen, if it's too painful, of course. I don't know what's going on here. TV will turn off soon. I don't know. Let's hope it doesn't.
Oh, just press the button. Just so it won't. Maybe a volume button up or down. I think that'll.
I have no idea. You see one on that side?
Yep. Try the one in front.
There we go. All right. It's not idle anymore. And this is just some of the self-rehabs that you can try. You can get some ThoroBands, and it's pretty much the same thing. You want to work in all planes of direction to help reduce that swelling. So if you're to the point where you can't put weight on it, or you got it elevated, you can try some resistance bands to kind of help also help with that fluid and help strengthen it. So even if you get to the point where you're past the immediate swelling of the ankle and you want to do things to kind of on your own to help strengthen the ankle, these type of exercises can definitely help with strengthening the muscles around the ankle to help you prevent from it reoccurring. Now, unfortunately, for most of the time when you sprain an ankle, the chance of reoccurrence is very high again. So you definitely want to make sure you pay attention to the rehab portion of things and take care of that. Say that again? I mean, it's just like,
You've already stretched it out.
you stretched it out, it's just more likely to do. It's not as strong anymore, you know what I mean? So, whereas it's funny because it's just like you break a bone, and that bone you put down sometimes is stronger, but of course it's not the original, right? It's a lot weaker than the initial. So the same thing goes with your ligaments. It's not as strong. A lot of times what happens too is we get back too soon, and we don't really allow it to continue to completely heal. Yeah.
I think I missed it on one of your early, maybe the first slide. An ankle sprain is really, did it say a tear?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not a complete tear, but there can be minor tears in the ligaments. Yep. Yeah. So basically, if you think about, I didn't put an anatomy picture in here, but you have your foot bone and you have basically your tibia and your fibula that connects to your foot bone, and then you have ligaments that keep that all in place, and that makes up the ankle joint. So if you sprained your ankle in the past, obviously proper footwear is key. So you want to make sure you're wearing things that, especially as I say, you're playing basketball, probably low tops aren't the best to go out there and play with. So that's why we preach high top sneakers and ankle braces, things like that, to help give your ankle some support. Because you know that after tearing it, especially, you're a lot weaker, so you want to wear something to to support it. So that's why you see athletes wear ankle braces or get their ankles taped. So the next one is Achilles tendon rupture. It happens. It happens pretty frequently, more than you probably realize. So what's the Achilles tendon? It connects your calf muscle to the heel bone of your foot. It's the most common injury of the injured tendon, in the foot. And most people say when it happens, it feels like they got shot in the heel. You have some pain and swelling with rupture, and if you can feel back there, you can definitely tell a palpable deficit where you can pretty much know oh yeah, this is torn. If you have any issues, they have a lot of problems with pushing off. You lose that plantar flexion of the foot with a torn Achilles. I could have put a picture of Kobe Bryant in here, but it's just. But, so one thing with Achilles tendon if you start feeling pain, or if you're feeling pain in that area, even if it's not ruptured, your best thing to do is just stop and allow it to rest, because you can have some Achilles tendonitis. And of course, if you're trying to push through it, thinking that, it'll be okay, you're just putting more stress on that tendon to give it more reason for it to rupture. All right. So when you start feeling that pain, ice always is good. NSAIDs are great as well. And then maybe for a time being, until you allow that tendon to kind of to kind of recover, you want to switch to low impact exercise. So you don't want to run or jog or play basketball or anything like that, but try biking or swimming, things like that doesn't require you to activate that tendon as much. Things you can do to prevent injury is stretching the Achilles tendon. So, grabbing the wall or the lunge and lean, trying to give that tendon some flexibility. The one thing and then we're going to talk about this going forward, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but you want to make sure that when you stretch, especially your Achilles tendon, you don't want to do it prior to. And we'll talk about why afterwards. You don't want to do a stretch for the Achilles tendon prior to activity. So if you one of these guys that like to play basketball on the weekends, it's not something you want to do prior to. And the reason is because you're just very tight, and you're going to give it more reason to rupture. And we'll talk about why going forward, and what you should do instead of, and when you should actually stretch this. So another common injury most people have, and this comes in mostly in a lot of runners, is like plantar fasciitis. All right. Any questions about the Achilles tendon?
I had the injury myself.
Yeah.
And the only question I have, I stretched before I still follow the same procedure as somebody that didn't have it, or as don't stretch before you do activity like running or something like that.
So, and we'll get to it. The thing you want to do before stretching really is active warm up. All right. So just light warm up. If you want to kind of warm those muscles up, because you're talking about stretching muscles that have just been sitting around and they're shortened all day, and you're stretching them, that can probably lead to more injury. So the recommendation is definitely to do some active warm up. So you're talking about like high knees, or a little light jog, things like that. And the best and the thought is to stretch after you finish your activity. See, most people like to do activities and then we walk off and we go home. But that's the time you should basically have a cool down period and stretch. Okay.
I thought you were going to say stretch before, then your active warm-up, then do your Achilles stretch, then do your exercise, then home.
But make sure and so that's okay. And if you do the active warm-up and you stretch, that's fine. But I think the main thing I'm trying to push to is just make sure you're stretching after the activity.
If you would say, like, instead of like, because some people just jump into it, but would you say the cool down is more important?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you should definitely, cool down, take a little stretch afterwards. Yeah.
Is there any exercise you can do to help prevent Achilles and tendon? I mean, it's not like a muscle, so more tendon.
Yeah.
Just
I don't think any necessarily exercise other than, you want to make sure that the muscles surrounding it are strong, your calf muscles are strong. But make sure you want it to be flexible as possible. You want it to be as limber as possible. So make sure you stretch it. It's probably one of the best things. You rupture it, you won't see me. You may see me and I may send you on to a surgeon. And so you have different treatment options depending on where you are. There are two options. You can either you can elect for surgery and get it fixed. And a lot of times if you get surgery, the rate of re-rupture is a lot lower. Or it actually can be treated non-operatively in a walking boot for a number of weeks. And so surgery is not always it's a case-by-case basis, but there's definitely a non-surgical option. Yeah.
He told me next day you gonna have surgery.
Yeah. Huh?
I said I had that about, I say 1990 I had it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Basketball.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can see a gunshot, pow.
Yeah.
Like what the,
Yeah.
like the floor opened up.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope never to experience it though, but I'm glad you can at least tell me about it.
Not fun, it's hard recovery.
Yeah.
So you can recover though.
Yeah.
You play again?
Yeah.
Okay, I like to hear that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm recovering from patellar tendon 4 months ago. I tore
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it. All right. So let's touch a little bit on plantar fasciitis. So with plantar fasciitis, inflammation of the plantar fascia, as you can see, that connects to the heel bone. Most people complain of pain with the first steps in the morning. We get out of bed, it hurts, but as the day goes on, it gets better. All right? It's kind of a classic, as in the medical term, we say classic board question for plantar fasciitis. Also, if you have a job that you stand for long periods of time, sometimes that can make it worse. Okay. So, kind of jumping in with this, it's the same thing. You can notice a theme. You rest ice, NSAIDs or ibuprofen Aleve are good for plantar fasciitis. Having good arch support in your shoes can help as well. There are different exercises you can try. I like the golf ball exercise, kind of get on your feet and roll, trying to stretch that fascia out. It feels good, and it can sometimes help. There are different exercises you can try, by like putting your heel against the wall and kind of pressing down, stretch that plantar fascia as well. Heel cups work well as well to kind of give some relief. You can try toe grabs on like a towel. That helps as well. It's one of those things that, conservative management, most of the time you can fix it with conservative management and NSAIDs and just kind of trying to take care of it a little bit. Injections for lingering cases, you can also always inject it, and a lot of times that helps. Very rare, very, very rare that you have surgery for this kind of injury.
Yeah, if you're a walker or just a jogger, I had it 30 years ago. If you have a loop that one part's a little uphill and the rest is downhill, always start on the uphill part first.
Okay, that's a good. That's a. Never thought about that, but yeah. And so this is one of those things that lingers and most people come in with, but it's not something that's necessarily very hard to diagnose and very hard to treat.
This may sound crazy. I had this.
Mhm.
And I was out running wind sprints dealing with it for some reffing I do.
Mhm.
And like the gun shot, pop. I've never had trouble with it since.
Your plantar fascia pop? Yeah.
And
That's very rare.
No,
Yeah.
And pain went away almost instantly. And
They did nothing about
I
it.
got full use of my foot.
Yeah.
And it's never been painful
Yeah.
again, so.
I mean, and that's like I think like a surgical option if that was the case, but that's very rare. I mean,
Does it mean it regrew together, or is it just?
it can.
Did
But
your arch fall?
No, I got high arches.
yeah.
And I don't know if it regrew or just, I still got used, but anyway, I didn't know.
And you felt like it. You felt like it popped.
I heard it.
Hmm.
I'm not hurt, just like you talked about.
Oh, yeah, you hear that.
Pop. I said, oh, shit. And then, but,
Hmm.
so, anyway, I just didn't, I'd never heard of that happening with plantar fascia.
Yeah.
Achilles,
Yeah.
ACL, whatever, so, anyway.
Good. All right. So the next one we're going to chat about real quick is tennis elbow. This is also very common. So basically, it's caused by overuse of the wrist extensors. A lot of people doing a lot of pronation, supination, or back and forth of the wrist. A lot of times it's caused by weak forearm muscles or gripping too tight. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you play tennis, but it can just be a little bit of everything that can cause whatever you're doing that's causing that motion. But too tight of a grip can definitely cause issues with tennis elbow. And one of the treatments for tennis elbow is also anti-inflammatories, rest, ice on the offending area. But tennis straps, so what tennis straps do, counterforce bracing straps, they help reduce or shorten the muscle. A lot of times that can give give some relief to the area. We can also do steroid injections into that. Sometimes that helps. And in some cases, some people do PRP. We don't do PRP in our office, not yet, but there are some offices that would do PRP to also help. Physical therapy for all of these issues, and I failed to mention before, is also a line of treatment conservatively.
I noticed you said incense, so how long will you take the incense?
So I like to How I like to do it is I like to tell patients if you can tolerate it. So you have to make sure you have adequate kidney function. But I usually tell people to take NSAIDs on a regular basis for about a week to kind of help with that anti-inflammatory effect. Most people may take it. I took it once, it didn't really help, and I stopped taking it. But I usually tell people to take it on a consistent basis for about a week, and then take it PRN after that.
Well, what do you tell your patients who have contraindications to taking NSAIDs?
So, if they have contraindications, so now I'm looking at, if Tylenol, although it doesn't have the anti-inflammatory effect, I'm actually looking at probably like steroids. Granted, if they don't have like diabetes or anything like that you don't want to. So you kind of got to look at all cases. But if they come to see me and they can take steroids, then that's probably the next step that I'm going to for anti-inflammatory purposes. This is just an example of some stretching that can help with tennis elbow. So again, you want to rest, you want to ice, you want to stretch that area out. If you start having pain with tennis elbow, or you start noticing that type of pain, this is some stretches you can do to kind of help with those symptoms. So rotator cuff syndrome. So some people have shoulder issues. So you have 4 muscles that make up the rotator cuff. Basically causes the power and motion in your shoulder. And most of the pain that people get from rotator cuff is from a direct blow or from other form of trauma, but most of it is overuse injury. Constant overhead motion, if you're talking about tennis or volleyball, things that cause you to do lifting, that's right, lifting weights, you can get basically like a bursitis or inflammation of the muscles or the tendons in that area that can feel like you have a torn rotator cuff, but it's more so just inflammation. Most of the time, if you have a completely torn rotator cuff, you really can't move that arm to a certain point. And that's kind of a telltale sign. Of course, you want to get an MRI to kind of confirm all of that. So again, just with everything else we've talked about, you want to do the things that you can do to strengthen the muscles of the rotator cuff to help prevent injury and also to help aid in recovery. NSAIDs also help physical therapy, and also if it becomes an issue that is kind of lingering, then you can also opt for steroid injections that put the medicine right at the site of pain, and a lot of times it can help a lot faster. Also, bracing and taping could help. It's not a 100% science, but it can help give you some support. I don't do a lot of bracing, but we have some athletes at both schools that will get braced to kind of help with the symptoms that they have and keep them from going past a certain point or things like that. So patellofemoral syndrome, or runner's knee, this is very common. It's one of the common knee pain issues that occurs. It's kind of hard to diagnose and treat. It's one of these it's a nuisance as a physician. People come in with aching knee pain. They're made worse by climbing stairs or kneeling. And it's mostly caused by, tight hamstrings or weak quadricep muscles. And the problem you get with that is people come in, it's like, well, I work out. It's like, but, you're probably not doing exactly what you need to do to help strengthen the muscles around this area. And this is where physical therapy really does a great job in helping. Again, NSAIDs, sometimes even bracing a certain area helps with that as well. So some of the treatments for that, you start having that pain, and you probably get it a lot from just doing a lot of running, a lot of people running. So like I was saying earlier, activity modification, quad strengthening, make sure your hamstrings are a lot more flexible, physical therapy, NSAIDs. I think I talked about bracing. So one of the last injuries we want to talk about is concussions. So concussions is like the hot topic. You normally don't see that in a lot of people that do things over the weekend. However, you have some soccer players, you have some people around here that play rugby. You can get it from softball, or just about anything really, actually. Car accidents, so it's something to kind of know. So what is concussion? I usually tell my athletes to make it really simple. It's basically a bruise of your brain. And it can be caused by a difference of forces. You can cause from a direct blow, or you can cause from like acceleration, deceleration. So people that get on like roller coasters can get concussions, or it can be caused by a body blow that basically energy is transferred to the head. It can cause concussion. That's a pretty good body blow, but it's something that could happen. So I guess one of the main things I tell people is just know the signs and symptoms of it. People are athletes. We talk about confusion, amnesia, loss of consciousness, nausea, vomiting, memory deficits, dizziness, sleep disturbances. People become, depressed or have mood swings. They don't really know why after having a head injury. And a lot of times that can be from a concussion or post-concussion issue. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as well. So the one big thing for concussions to talk about is rest. That's pretty much the mainstay of treatment. So if you suffer a concussion, or you feel like you know someone that suffered concussion, or you have concussion-like symptoms, rest is the key, all right? And if you think about it in the terms of it being a bruise or injury, just like anything else that we talked about, you want to kind of give that thing rest. Now, you can't put ice on your brain. You can if you want to, but it's not really it's not really going to help on your head. But and so the main thing is just rest, all right? And this is like one of these hot topics that we quite still don't know the answer to the proper way to treat it. But so far the consensus is definitely resting, and that means how do you rest that? That means nothing that causes stimulation to your brain. You want to try to decrease that as much as possible. So that means no computers, you want to cut back on TV, no phones, things that's going to flash and cause your brain to be overly stimulated.
So what's the time period that you recommend to rest, and when can you return to activity?
You're the last person supposed to ask all these questions. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking with you. So it is, but no, seriously though. It really is a case-by-case issue. I'll just say for me personally, for a child, a young kid that's playing football, they sustain a concussion, it's automatically 2 weeks, because the child's brain is still developing, and you don't even want to take that risk. For my college athletes to return from a concussion, normally it's about a 7-day period, but then they're a little different because you have people that are constantly monitoring them. But about 7 days for college. Now that, like I said, that can vary. We have people that have concussions that have missed months or weeks or even a whole year because they're still having symptoms from concussion. So it's kind of hard to say, hey, if I think you suffer concussion, you need to be out for a week. Actually, I think if you suffer concussion, you need to be seen by a physician to make sure that it is just a concussion. Especially if you have a loss of consciousness or anything like that. That's more of a, you need to get in to be seen, maybe get some imaging done. For concussions, imaging is not necessarily a thing that has to be done, and it doesn't show anything on it, but if you start having symptoms that look more neurological, you want to make sure that it is just a concussion, not something more. So to answer your question, if somebody suffers concussion, it's probably best to get in to be evaluated regardless, and kind of take it on a case-by-case basis. Any other questions? All right, so we talked about this, and we've been talking about how to avoid some of these athletic injuries. So one of the main things if you're a weekend warrior is to try to challenge yourself throughout the week. Don't just get out there on Saturday thinking you're going to do the same thing that you've been doing in high school, because it doesn't work like that. You can't just pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. You gotta do something constantly throughout the week, whether it's walking, there's this little light jog, but it's kind of sitting down. Most people work at desk jobs or sedentary activities, and then try to think you're gonna get out there and run up and down a court or run a marathon. It just doesn't work that way. So try to find a few days throughout the week to kind of challenge yourself, to kind of keep yourself, keep your body warm, keep your body fresh. All right. We talked about stretching. So stretching is key because when you're tight, you tend to overcompensate and you tend to favor, certain areas, and that causes, it can lead to more injuries, especially the back. And a lot of people they neglect stretching their hamstrings, and that a lot of times tight hamstrings causes a lot of the lower back pain that most people have. They complain of back pain when they're running because they don't warm up and they don't stretch before and after. And so you end up having that back pain when you wake up the next morning, and that's because most of the time your hamstrings are very tight. So, mobility is key. I tell people that have back pain, these like yoga or, Pilates, these things, especially for men, you think that it's not too manly. Those things work. They work well. I do yoga, and when I walk out of yoga, I feel like a new person because, I've been stretched like crazy. So I definitely recommend, not saying it's something to do all the time, but every now and again to kind of help you get increase your mobility. All right. So this is what we were talking about before. You want to start with a good warm-up, all right, before you really stretch. It's important to be flexible, but prolonged static stretching before an activity is wrong. These types of muscles sometimes can shut down your muscles, which can strain the muscles. So that's why it's best to get a little light jog in. Or if you ever go to a game or football game beforehand, you'll see some of the guys out here running a little bit. They'll do like high knee kicks or things like that before they get together to stretch. And that's part of the reason why. Because as it says at the bottom, active warm-up prepares your body for work and increasing the muscle activation and the blood flow to the soft tissues. So that's why it's a little bit more important to kind of get a little light jog or a little light warm-up in before you stretch, and then activity, and then make sure you're stretching after the activity. And again, I think this goes without being said, but some of us can be very macho. If you have some pain, don't try to push yourself through the pain thinking that, that you can take it. I think at a certain time, the adage of no pain, no gain is kind of wrong. If you have some pain, you might want to stop, slow down, because a lot of times if you just kind of like with anything else, if you have pain, you'll tend to overcompensate, and it can cause more serious injury. But probably one of the biggest keys to all of this is definitely to hydrate. All right, as you age, your body, your muscles hold less water, just naturally, and so it's best to just hydrate, especially here in South Louisiana. It's hot. I'm from South Carolina. It's hot down here, so the main thing, especially if you're going to be outside, is hydration. When you're starting to feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So you should make sure you water intake prior to, after, during, and after. But especially prior to. Most people tend to neglect that. They try to say, "Oh, I worked out, I'm hydrating." But if you're already thirsty, then your body's already. It says 5% here, but it's about 3%. You're about 3% dehydration already. So you want to make sure you drink plenty of fluids before and throughout the day, and that definitely helps. Questions?
Don't hydrate 5 minutes before you go exercise.
I mean, you can drink it, but you should be doing it. You should be doing it throughout the day. Yes, throughout the day, all the time. It's just important. I myself, I try to drink at least a liter or 2 a day, and so you're gonna be running to the restroom, but in the end, you're gonna be hydrated. And this is going off topic, but most people talk about overeating. When you actually, so most of the time the more you eat, the more it's really you're thirsty. And if you intake a little bit more water throughout the day, you realize you start eating less because you've filled your stomach with that space of fluid. But this is where I can be found. This is my card. If anybody needs a card, I have some. I brought a ton in, so if you need a card, but this is where I can be found. And yep.
Of course, on steroids, someone told me you don't want to get, at least in a particular area, you don't want to get too many steroid shots. It can become problematic for tearing the muscle down.
So the consensus is 2, maybe 3 steroids throughout the year is probably where you want to stop at, because what the thought is that you can weaken the tendons, and so that's why you may go to most doctors, most orthopedic surgeons or sports medicine physicians. If you've had 2 or 3 steroid injections in your knee, you probably in a year's time they'll probably stop there and say. So that's when mostly you say every 3 to 4 months. is probably, every 4 months probably is about the key.
Coming back to the rotator cuff,
Mm-hmm.
is if you have a big tear,
Mm-hmm.
is surgery the only,
Yep, it's the only option. It's not like an Achilles tendon that you just immobilize and it grows back. Surgery is the option, because what happens is if you wait long enough, that tendon retracts and it becomes harder to pull that tendon back. So it's essentially, basically, that tendon is pulled off the bone, your humerus bone, and your shoulder, and so you want to, so most of the time, the sooner the better to get that. It becomes easier for the surgeon to anchor that tendon back onto that area.
so there, I think, I saw there are 4 muscles that make up the rotator cuff,
Mhm.
something like that.
Mhm.
So to make a difference, which one is?
Yeah, because so each one has each one has a function in certain directions. So you have some muscles that cause you to go in this direction. You have some muscles that cause you to go in this direction and to raise your hand above your head. So if you tear one, it's probably best to get it fixed, especially if you're having functional issues, right? Because really, it all boils down to giving you the best, functionality that you can basically live your life with. There are some people that have shoulder issues that never get fixed because their goals in life aren't to do a lot of things with their arms. So that comes on a case-by-case basis, but yeah. How I did on time? Told you it wasn't gonna be a whole hour. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys. Hopefully I answered your questions, and if I'm up here. So.